Ever wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters podcast. Join host Julien Haye in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
Bonjour and welcome to the 5th episode of RiskMasters with Kathy Griffin, an experienced chief risk officer and compliance leader with a diverse background that spans traditional financial institutions and innovative startups. Today, Kathy shares her unique journey into the world of risk, the lesson learned from navigating both startups and established companies, and her approach to leading with empathy and innovation in risk management. In this episode, you will discover 1. The challenges Kathy faced becoming a leader and how she overcame her imposter syndrome. 2. How to effectively communicate risk and compliance to a mature and established board versus the board of a startup. 3. How to ensure the risk function acts as an innovation enabler. You will find more information on my website, avtm.com, including the transcript and the notes of today's episode, as well as tons of thought leadership articles on risk management. And now, more about Kathy. Kathy has worked in financial services for nearly 30 years, the last 18 of which have been in risk and compliance. She's currently the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Uber Payment UK and was previously the Director of Compliance at Monzo Bank. Kathy is passionate about risk and compliance being an enabler for innovation and growth, and believes that embracing diversity and inclusion is key to the success of any business. And now, I give you Kathy. Katie, welcome with us today. Today we're going to cover and go back to your career path, then dovetail into what does that mean to be a chief risk officer, and then finally we will dovetail a little bit more into what does that mean to work with infrastructure companies and also some aspect around risk governance. But before we get there, let's go a little bit more into your career path. And the first question I ask for you is, how did you get to where you are today?
Thanks, Julien. I think probably like every person I've ever met who works in risk and compliance, I fell into it by accident. I worked for Citibank, City Financial, for a lot of years, and I worked in their operational areas. I dropped out of university after just a few weeks, and got a job answering the telephone in a finance company in Nottingham, where I'm from. I was supposed to do 3 evenings there. I was still there 3 years later, and then I moved to City. So it's very much something I fell into financial services, and then after about sort of 8 or 9 years working in operational roles, I fell into my first risk and compliance role, more through somebody I knew than any real ability or skill on my part. Bit of nepotism early on in my career. But I got my first role there as an auditor and absolutely loved it. I love working in roles where you get to find out everything that's happening in an organisation, because I'm exceptionally nosy, but also that where you get to really help improve processes and like drive continuous improvement across organisations. And that's what I believe risk and compliance should be. So after many years working for City, I've moved around since then into a few different roles. As you mentioned earlier, I've worked in very traditional organisations. I worked for Royal Bank of Scotland, I worked for Capital One, I worked for Citibank, but then I've also worked in brand new startups. I worked for a startup called Earned just as COVID was kicking off, which was a very interesting experience. I was Director of Compliance at Monzo, who were at that point much more into scale-up territory. And now, as you mentioned, I'm moving to Uber, where I'm really excited to start in January. So it's been a series of decisions made basically on trying to be brave and take the opportunities that were offered to me, rather than having a set path for my career, if I'm honest.
And I think we're going to come back to that. It's been a common thread with all the people I talked to so far. And I'd like to see your perception in terms of how risky you think your career was. But let's go back to that in a minute. So you're doing plenty of things as well, right? You're involved in profit, non-profit organization, consultancy. How do you juggle so many activities in your busy life?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I have the consultancy Lift 2 or Lift Squared, which I run with my friend and colleague Claire Pratt, and we were basically created to help support startups in really proportionate and risk-based compliance and risk consultancy, and critically very affordable. Most startups cannot afford £2,000 a day for a Big Four organisation. So that's more of a passion project for us. It's never going to pay the bills, but it does help us keep in touch with new and fresh organisations, and that really helps us stay on top of like new technologies and new innovation too. So that takes a little bit of time. And then I also have my advisor role for Stratify, which is a really cool investment app, which is focused on environmentally sound investments, but also helping people like me that don't really understand the investment world to easily and safely invest their money for future growth. And then I've just taken on the role as a risk trustee for ACE, which is an incredible charity in the north of England that helps support children that have fallen through the cracks in society a little bit, which is a topic very close to my heart. So yes, I have a lot on. I don't have any children, which I think probably helps, although I do have a standard poodle who takes up too much of my time. And I have a very supportive husband who definitely helps me balance all of that with home. I find it really helpful just to compartmentalize my time. So my time during the day is very much my time for Target, as was and will be for Uber, and then I use allocated slots out of traditional work hours to fulfill my other responsibilities. I'm a very organized person. I would say it's probably the my biggest strength, and has been hugely helpful in my career. So by keeping myself well organized and making sure that I stick to the time that I've allocated for my different responsibilities, I find that works really, really well for me.
Yeah, and if I can build on that, I'd be curious to see whether in any of the discussion, whether it's in your former organizations or with a new one, the topic came up around everything you're doing around your main job.
Yeah, I think it can cause concern for people because it does sound like a lot. But the consultancy is very small and very bespoke, so that literally takes maybe 4 or 5 hours a week. And the others are even more sort of ad hoc than that. So it's not actually that much to balance. There's a lot of things going on, and too many inboxes on my laptop. I get incredibly confused by which is which. But from a time management perspective, actually it's fine. But I can understand why some employers might be concerned about it eating into that work time. I've always been very output focused. The teams I lead, I've never been one to say, I'm going to need you at your desk from 9 till 5 every day. For me, we've progressed since those days in banking in the 90s where it was all about the number of hours you spent working. I'm much more focused on my team delivering really good quality, really proportionate, really well-balanced output, and in whatever way works for them as people that also allows them to have fulfilled and balanced lives.
And we might re-explore that a little bit further down in the interview. Now I'd like to shift us in a slightly different topic, but potentially connected. What was the hardest challenge you had to overcome in your journey, and how did you bounce back from failure?
I have a couple of examples in my career of almost total failure professionally, and both of them came very close to being really impactful for my future career. One of them was when I became branch manager at City, very young. I was 21 years old. I was given a £6 million branch because I was a really good salesperson. So they assumed I'd be a really good manager. And I wasn't. I was absolutely terrible. I didn't have the emotional intelligence or the maturity or the experience to make good choices. I was a terrible leader of people, and I couldn't absorb the pressure that I was feeling. And a lot of that pressure was self-imposed. It always has been in my career. But it got to a point where I was making other people unhappy because I was taking that pressure that I was feeling and distributing it amongst them rather than absorbing it and helping lead them in the delivery that we needed. I ended up getting really poorly. I would say probably I had a bit of a breakdown, and could really no longer continue in that role, which is a really difficult lesson to learn at 21 when you're really proud. I was really proud to be such a young manager and my career was going so well. And when it fell apart, I found that really hard. So I stepped back. I left that branch and I went to be an assistant manager in another branch and did that for a few more years. And that was really hard, because you feel the weight of judgment from other people, even if it's not really there. But I was really good at being an assistant manager, and I think that helped. And for a long time, I thought, well, this is my line, this is my role. I'm a good wing person. I'm the right hand person for a real leader. So I stuck at that level for a while, and then sort of progressed through to sort of other management positions, but in a smaller scale way. So I became a manager of a team of underwriters, and I found that much easier to cope with. It was much more transactional, and that really helped me cut my teeth. Then I got my first head of compliance and risk role, and really the same thing happened. I was there for about 2.5 years, but I found it very difficult. Again, I found being top of the tree very difficult to cope with emotionally. I struggled that my decision was the final decision and I had nobody to run things by or talk things through. And again, it turned me into a much poorer version of myself. I ended up, again, quite unwell. I was having panic attacks and was unable to. I remember traveling to Milton Keynes once for work and just crying all the way down on the train. And then when I got there, I just physically couldn't walk through the door of the building. And I sat on a call with my boss outside in a field, because I just couldn't physically go in. And again, I stepped back. I went back to a senior manager position at that point, and went and licked my wounds for a while, and really tried to work out why this had happened again and why I had let myself get into that position. And really, the conclusion I came to was that I am riddled with imposter syndrome. Always have been. Most people I know are. I used to think it was predominantly women. I'm no longer sure that's the case. So I think a combination of my imposter's voice being so loud, me listening to it too much, but also just putting this incredible level of pressure on myself, to be perfect, and to take on everything and all the responsibility in my team had just led me to really, really dark places. And they were both really, really difficult times in my life, but I'm so glad they happened because I've learned so much from it. And now when I go into a new role, I no longer have, it's almost an arrogant thing to think that everything lies on you. It absolutely doesn't. I am at Target and at Monzo especially, and at Earn. You're as good as the people that you work with. And I've worked with some incredible people. So actually, if you start to realize that it's not just you and that your role is to help other people be brilliant at their jobs rather than taking on all of the pressure and everything yourself, it's turned me into a much better leader. It's made my teams better. And hopefully it's made the people that work with and for me much happier than I made people in the earlier teams that I led.
You're talking about actually being an inspiring leader. Have you come across anyone who inspired you to become that person in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with some incredible people, and some absolute shockers. But we'll keep it positive. The person who gave me my first role in compliance and risk is a guy called Kevin Davidson. He's been my mentor since I was 19 years old, although I don't think he knows he's mentoring me. He's just quietly inspirational. He's been a leading role in my sort of professional career. And I also, when I was at RBS, I worked for a woman called Sandy Royden, who was, I'd always wanted a female role model. I'd always want, because I'm such a such a feminist, and I'm such a fan of women. And she was really one of the first women that I worked for who showed me that you can be entirely authentic and be an incredible leader and great at your role. But also the people that I've worked with. So there's the woman, Claire Pratt, who I now do my consultancy with. I've worked with her off and on for 10 years. Continuously enthusiastic and imaginative and innovative and creative. So these are all people that have had a real impact on the leader that I think I now am.
How do you find your gender, if at all, has impacted the way you approach your career, and perhaps also brought you to think about things differently compared to peers?
I think definitely. I think women have different experiences in the workplace, or certainly if you're as very, very old as I am, that was the case. So being in banking in the 90s, I was, so when I was a branch manager, I was the only female branch manager in the district. And our management meetings were often held on the golf course. I was the only one that didn't golf, so I would go and bring the drinks to and from the male managers. There were many, many examples that I think most women have of always being the one to get the lunch, always being the one to take the minutes. I'm fascinated by the fact that I did it, at the time I just accepted it. Today's Kathy would in no way put up with a treatment like that. But I think it's a really interesting thing to learn about yourself, that you can fall into cultures that are not positive for you, and not even see that happening when it happens slowly. What that's done is given me a real passion for inclusion and diversity in the teams that I have, from a gender perspective, but also from ethnicity, LGBTQ+, really passionate about social mobility. So I think that's informed a lot of the way in which I recruit. I would never, for example, put an educational requirement on for any of the roles I advertise, because I've never been qualified for any role I've ever had. I don't have a degree, and yet every job I've ever had has required one. My personal belief is that it's super elitist to expect anybody to have a degree before they take any role on. And I hope it's made me a real advocate for women and other people from protected characteristics, and to really understand that a culture in which people can be themselves, and that a non-hierarchical culture where people have their voice and anybody can challenge anybody brings so much more innovation and so much more success than the cultures that I worked in as a woman back in the day, where my ideas weren't valued or even heard. So again, I think it's been bizarrely a positive thing for me in my career, even though at the time it probably didn't feel that way.
And if I may build on that a little bit, do you have a view around how what you just explained impact risk management, risk culture, and risk outcome?
You mean the diversity of thought?
Yeah,
absolutely. So I think for compliance especially, and risk management are relatively new disciplines within financial services. They've been around for sort of 20 odd years, but back in the day, it was very much we will stand on the sidelines and we will tell you what you've done wrong, and then we will expect you to go and fix it, and we'll tell you if you do that wrong too. I think building much more inclusive, collaborative teams at second line of defence, which is sort of my specialism, has helped pull away from that completely. So now, absolutely, we try and point out ways in which things could be done better, but we also support in the delivery of those improvements. And that's where that creativity, that innovation, those different viewpoints comes in. We no longer say, this control failed, so you need another pair of eyes on it. Instead, we say, is there a different way of doing this? Is there a technology we can use? Is there anything, like, as we move into the world of AI and increased technological advancement, what can we do to make this easier to be better? And that didn't happen back in the 90s when everybody thought and looked and sounded the same.
Yeah, the world is evolving quickly, and I found in that context the recent FCA paper on diversity and inclusion in financial services very interesting and telling. Probably not for today, but that's definitely direction in terms of having that diversity of thoughts. That also from a regulatory standpoint, things are going to evolve. Building on especially your career path, how would you describe what you do, and where do you spend the most time on as a chief risk officer, head of compliance, actually, because you've done both sides?
So I think I have been, so as and it's one of the reasons I'm super excited about joining Uber is it's a much smaller team there in the team that I'm joining. So as a CRO, quite often you become a figurehead, and I spend my days on meetings or on committees and inputting to the strategic direction of the firm, which is all stuff that I really enjoy. And it's all about building that strong team around you, building a culture, and all of that is great. But I do miss the tangible doing some actual work. And at Target, I've had such an incredible team, and the same at Monzo. Actually, the amount of work I was doing from a sort of a tangible output perspective wasn't that large. And at Uber, I fully expect that to change. So what I dream of is a CRO role where you get to operate at that level, you get to build a strategy, drive the culture, and all of those things that I'm so passionate about, but also have a practical hands-on approach and lead from the front within that team. And become less of a figurehead and more of a sort of a contributor.
So balancing the vision and the high-level leadership with the actual doing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's nirvana for me.
And that balance is always a bit tricky to achieve as well. There's always a pull in one direction, I did find at the very least. And building on that, how do you ensure the board and the executive team remain on top of the risk agenda?
I think this is a very different answer dependent on the nature of the organisation that you're with. So, in a more established firm like an old bank or a more traditional organisation, in a way that's easier because the board and exco absolutely understand the importance of risk and compliance management. They've probably been burned in the past. They've probably had some sort of regulatory scrutiny because you haven't, and they understand the pain of remediation and things like that. So in one way, it's easy in an old organisation or a more traditional organisation because they understand it. They have a fundamental acceptance of it as a discipline and a requirement. But on the flip side of that, quite often they can be set in their ways as to what they think that should look like. I have quite an informal approach to communication, and more traditional organisations sometimes struggle with that. They want 80-page risk reports in Word documents calling out everything that we're doing, which I've never found to be particularly helpful. So with those sort of boards, it's about taking them on the journey and trying to implement incremental movement towards a more streamlined and efficient way of discussing risk. With the startups and scale-ups, the challenge can be getting them to understand the value that good risk and compliance brings, because they don't have the battle scars. But I found in those sort of organisations, you're generally working with people who are so passionate about what they're doing that they have their eyes wide open to value and benefit. So it's really easy to show them how good risk management can drive a really cool customer product, can drive a frictionless customer journey, can drive customer retention and joy. These are the things that really resonate with boards and excos at startups, and that conduct risk especially, or wider compliance and risk management can really be instrumental in. They're much more open to you presenting it however you like. So I can be as maverick as I like with my risk reporting in those organisations generally. So there are different challenges with both. For me, it's always been about figuring out the individuals, how they like their information being presented to them now, and working with them on how that can be tweaked and evolved to make sure that it's the most efficient and effective way possible.
Yeah, and imagine in your career and the type of organization you worked with, you had to flex your style quite significantly to adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I think especially when I moved from big banking to the first startup, when I moved to Earned, that was a big culture shock. Um, and 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 it was an incredible experience actually, because for all that time in banking and financial services was hugely beneficial to me, and I made great contacts and had a great time. This was a moment where I just thought, this is what I want to do. I want to work for an organization that's fast paced and innovative and isn't afraid to try new things. And bizarrely, you can be a little bit more risk hungry in those organizations, because you try something and if it's wrong, you can unpick it really quickly, rather than an organization with more legacy systems or issues. So when I first moved over, I absolutely had to pivot my approach really, really quickly. And since then, it's been about, when I join an organization, understanding what that organization needs now, what I think they need in 5 years, and helping to try and move them along that journey to get there.
And that's a perfect segue to the next question around how do you ensure the risk function support and enable the strategic agenda of the firm?
Yeah. And this is everything. This is why I love what I do. As I mentioned earlier, there was a time when I remember when every compliance function in the country was called the business prevention department, because all we did was say no. I'm really proud of the fact that I don't think I've ever given a flat no. I've always been a, not that way. How about this? Let's find something else that works, sort of advocate. So I think I take the support function really seriously. We are there to enable the business to make innovative and exciting decisions, to build new products and services, and to take controlled risks to achieve their objectives. Everything we do should be to support that. And and that's really easy to get right, actually, when you've got the right team around you and when you can build those relationships. At Monzo, the compliance team there that I was part of, and still continues to this day, they are involved in every new product from the outset. And when I say outset, I mean from the minute it pings into somebody's head as an idea, compliance are involved. And when they launch products that no one's ever done before. So, for example, Monzo Flex, where they launched that was really quite innovative. The regulator had never quite seen anything like it, and we didn't really know what they'd think of it. And you can tell I'm a compliance geek, because I just think it's so cool to be involved in a project for the first time and helping the FCA understand what we were trying to achieve and finding the best way to do it. We could only do that because that compliance function was a true enabler of Monzo. That's how you build really good relationships, and that's also how where you get your good stuff. So you can do as much compliance monitoring as you like. You can do 100 thematic reviews. You can do loads of BAU testing. Where you get your good stuff is people talking to you, and they only do that if you've got a history of enabling them in supporting what they need to do for the business.
I think there is a lot to learn and unpack in what you just said. And the bigger the organization, probably the more what you just mentioned is applicable in my experience. And I think it's a perfect segue to the point on innovation and how to stay competitive. So how do you balance what you just mentioned in a way as compliance or risk function being a business enabler and driver for innovation, with the need as well to be compliant and to manage risk in a thorough manner?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about proportionality ultimately. And I don't want to be reductive about it, because it is a lot more complex than this. But most of what risk and compliance management is about doing the right thing for people, doing the right thing for your customers, for your shareholders, for your clients, for your colleagues. So whilst there are a million regulations, and those of us in compliance and risk like to make out like it's a bit of a dark art and super complicated and you can never understand it, actually most of it boils down to, does this feel like the right thing to do? So that the move to outcomes focused regulation from the FCA specifically has really helped in that. It's no longer you need to read this 200-page rule book and comply with every single regulation. There are some specifics, and that's what we're there to support the business in understanding. But predominantly, it's about building a culture of the customer's experience and the customer's needs being met, being central to the offering and the culture, and especially under consumer duty. Now there should always have been a focus on making sure your products and services are behaving the way you think they are and are giving the outcomes that you think they are. But now there's an actual regulatory requirement to do that, and it's such a positive step forward, because once you build that into your ethos and your culture, then actually it no longer becomes operations versus compliance. You're all pulling in the same direction, which is fundamentally the better it is for the customer, and the more and the fairer it is for the customer, the better and fairer it is for us as colleagues too, and as a business.
If I expand on especially the client outcome, could you share an example or some example where and how risk management strategies have helped navigate a particularly complex or challenging situation for clients?
Yes, absolutely. So I've worked in a couple of organisations in my career where we've been client based, and it's very challenging when you have 20 to 30 clients who all have a slightly different view of how things should be done, and trying to balance those requirements with your own understanding of what is needed from a risk perspective, from a compliance perspective. I've always found that the best solution there is to have a core offering that says, this is what we think the right thing to do is. Now, if you want things done slightly different to that, we can talk about it and we can help enable that. But fundamentally, this is the core of what we do, and this is why we think it's the right thing for you. And then we can add the bells and whistles, or the intricacies, or the specificities, that's hard to say, as you move through. So consumer duty is a really good example of that. When you're working in an organisation with multiple clients, every one of those clients has their understanding of what consumer duty means to them. And for us, it's very much the compliance and risk team about understanding their understanding, and trying to build a product that is suitable for all, but with the configurability to allow other people to be in control of their own compliance. Because as we know, you can outsource your services and your processes. You absolutely can't outsource your risk and compliance. And then it becomes a need to be truly collaborative between those two organisations to get to the right place. But again, it's all about relationship building. It's all about having those open, honest conversations where we could say to a client, we think you're wrong there. We think this is the right way, and for them to say the same to us, and both end up being stronger.
In the end, it's about collaboration, isn't it, in that context, and working collaboratively with the client to get to the joined up view.
Yeah, completely.
And if we think about financial services, and we have terrible example, but they keep coming back. So the financial services industry is no stranger to disruption, and also whether it's operational, but also from a technological standpoint. On an interview I did earlier this year, the person mentioned that any organization she worked with had gone through digital transformation and could call themselves more technology-driven organization at banks or financial services, or regulatory change, as you mentioned. How should organizations foster a culture of adaptability in that context and resilience, especially what is the role of risk management in that context?
Yeah, again, it's the answers are very different dependent on the nature of the organization. So for a smaller organization, for a startup or a scale-up, it is much easier to flex, much easier to pivot. And as I mentioned earlier, if you do launch a new product and you expect it to behave a certain way, or if a new regulation comes in and you make some changes, and it's much easier, they tend to be more data-driven, which is crucial. So you can easily say, oh, actually, that's not going quite the way we thought it would, or that's having this unforeseen impact that we just didn't think about. It's much easier to continuously monitor and to move quickly in fixing. So in younger, smaller organisations, embracing technology is difficult from a cost perspective because they don't tend to have much money. Luckily, some technologies are becoming much more practical from a cost perspective. But other than that, they do get to be more innovative and, as I say, slightly risk hungrier because of their ability to unpick and move on and assess all the time. In a larger organisation or a more traditional organisation, they may well have more funds to invest in a technology, implement it. So, for example, if you look at the world of financial crime, implementing a transaction monitoring solution in a startup is easy. You've got the data, and as long as you go for a system that's really configurable, that you can grow your alerts as you and flex them as you learn more about your business, it's easy to do. And from a time perspective, it's short. You try and implement a transaction monitoring system within an older, more established organization with multiple clients or with multiple systems, with legacy systems, it's really, really challenging. And that is why I think you find the more traditional organizations really wanting to embrace technology, but it's very difficult to do it quickly. So you get to a point where by the time you've implemented something 12, 18, 24 months later, there's already something better out on the market. And that's why you see more banks now having a separate division for technological innovation. So they almost have a startup within a bank where they say, all right, give us that. Let us operate in a really agile, progressive manner and you operate within the constraints of your sort of legacy traditional structure, and we'll bring it together. And I think that's a much better solution for the larger scale organization than trying to continue to implement technologies made for young companies in organizations with much more complex infrastructures.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier, for example, artificial intelligence. We could add machine learning, blockchain, which are all technologies that underpin what you just mentioned in terms of new capabilities in KYC, for example. How should the industry embrace this innovation to enhance operational efficiency and effectively manage risk in a better way? And you already touched on this aspect, but anything else you would add to that?
I'm a big fan of AI, specifically sort of your ChatGPT. I think they make life easier. They make things like horizon scanning and regulatory research easier. And if you use them well, they can be incredibly beneficial. The problem you have with AI, though, is it's only as good as the information that it has, and sometimes we don't always understand how up to date that is. You can ask it what you think is the right question in slightly the wrong way and get a really skewed response. And also bringing it back to diversity and inclusion. It's very difficult to be sure that the response you get has no bias. The world is built for white men. It is built off the data of white men. And from an AI perspective, the information you get back when you when you sort of give it a command can be really focused on that demographic. So my concern is that we could end up worsening our position from inclusion and diversity by not considering that through use of AI. So I think it's really exciting. I think there are much greater minds than me that can give insight into it. I just think we need to be really careful to make sure that we overlay it with that human element of, but what does this mean for us, and is this the right thing for our people?
So effectively not applying it at face value, but applying critical thinking to what we see in front of us.
Absolutely.
So now I'd like to take us to the next stage and final stage of our discussion, and on a much lighter note. What superpower do you wish you had?
Well, I've been doing CrossFit for the last 3 years, and I'm spectacularly bad at it. I'm enthusiastic, but rubbish, which is probably the title of my autobiography. So I would like super strength. I would love to just bowl into the gym one day and start cleaning and jerking 80 like some of the incredible women in there.
I wish I had the same. And I have very poor coordination as well, which doesn't help in this situation. What is your favorite book?
I have a couple of favourite authors. Anything by Christopher Brookmyre. He's a Scottish author that writes, I guess, thrillers, but they're just so well written and so engaging. So anything by him, I must have read them all like 10 times. And then more recently, every year, just before I go on holiday, most Octobers, and every year, just before I go on holiday, Richard Osman releases one of the new Thursday Murder Clubs, and they're just so beautifully written, and the characters are so rounded and lovely and warm, and it's so unusual for a man to write women so well that they bring me joy.
We'll have to try. Your favorite inspirational quote?
Actually, this was something that Elizabeth Olsen said, the actor from the Marvel films, and she said that the greatest thing her dad ever said to her and her sisters was that no is a full sentence. And I love that. I've spent most of my life trying to find a way to say no, trying to give reasons for saying no rather than using it as a full sentence. So I'm trying to adopt that in my life now.
And where can people learn more about you?
So the consultancy Lift2 has a website, which is lift2.co.uk, shockingly. So that's got a lot more about myself and the business and Claire on there. But other than that, I seem to be everywhere at the moment. I've done a couple of podcasts. I do quite a lot of speaking engagements now at conferences. So there's probably more Kathy Griffin out there than anybody ever wanted.
And finally, any final advice for emerging risk leaders or anything they should be doing or avoid doing?
Yeah, so I think for me, probably especially for women, but as I mentioned earlier, imposter syndrome very much impacts us all. I've found that saying yes to the things that scare you slightly, whether it's a new role or a new project within a role or doing a podcast, saying yes to things that take you outside of your comfort zone has led me to meet incredible people and have incredible experiences. So I think a combination of that, and as you become more successful in your career, supporting the people around you. I have a particular dislike for people that pull the ladder up behind them. I think that supporting the people in your career that have got you where you are, and helping them to achieve success too, is really crucial in building a network. I am rubbish at networking. If you put me in a networking event, I would freeze and be miserable as sin. But building a network organically through the people that you work with and being kind to people and being understanding and empathetic with people, firstly, brings incredible people into your life. But secondly, when you need people, it can be a lonely place, especially being a CRO. It brings you people who you can really trust the views of, to run things by, and you form a little sort of hive mind for making difficult decisions, which has been absolutely one of the greatest things in my career.
Well, Kathy, thank you so much for that advice. It was a fantastic discussion, so much insight and things to unpack as well and learn from. I wish you best of luck with your new role. I think you're starting in January, so we are going to see much more of you on the other side of in 2024. And so best of luck.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
As we close our conversation with Kathy Griffin, her insights into facing the complexities of risk management and leadership leave us inspired. Kathy's journey from an accidental start to becoming a trailblazer in the field highlight the essence of resilience and the impact of embracing diversity and innovation. A huge thank you to Kathy for sharing her invaluable experiences with us on RiskMasters today, reminding us that the key to mastering risk lies in courage and continuous learning. To dive deeper into today's episode, access show notes, transcript and more, please visit my website avitium.com, and remember, keep pushing boundaries, keep having an impact, and never shy away from becoming the master of your destiny. To the next time.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, Here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julienhaye.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.